Hold it up. I woke up this morning with a horrible frog in my throat. 2 hours ago, I was not able to communicate, which those of you who know me know that is a big problem. I like to talk. Welcome to the session on where microtransit fits into the ecosystem of mobility in rural and low-density communities. Mic is not working.
Testing.
Is that better? Is that working better if I hold that up here? Good. So I'm Kelley Coyner. I've been working in the mobility and transit world and other aspects of transportation for a very, very long time. But I came to this particular issue as a head of a transit agency in Northern Virginia in 2015. And at that point in time, I was looking for a way to connect workers to our transit system, to our brand new Silver Line, which we were really excited about, and we knew there were huge gaps. And I went to providers who were available in the moment. I don't want to call anyone out in particular, but included TNCs and some others that are really thriving now, and said, how can you help me in the darkest reaches of suburbia like Arlington and Falls Church and Alexandria, and then maybe Fairfax County, or in Loudoun, where people were hospitality workers who needed to travel some way other than trying to walk on the interstate or ride their bike on the interstate at night. And the answer was, there's not enough density there for us to try to do a shared service. That was the first answer. The next answer in 2016 and 2017 is, well, what we want to do is identify badly performing transit lines and replace them with our services. I was like, now that dog done hunt. So it was a particularly frustrating time. And I'm going to draw on something that Robin said yesterday. Transit is about improv, and it has been for a long time. So we came to a situation in our region where massive parts of the fixed rail system were closed for repairs. And guess what? Suddenly we could do shared rides and pooled rides and microtransit to meet the need to get people from one place to another when they couldn't connect through the system. Then transit crashed and burned, and like everything else in the mobility sector, in 2020, and we found ourselves in 2021 with how are we going to get people to get vaccinated. And it was truly exciting because this time around we had answers. We had people providing services, not just in big urban areas where transit could substitute in their services for it, but in smaller communities like Lubbock, Texas, or in Indiana, or in Tennessee, or in Florida. And we had a great deal of invention. Now that we're coming out of this and we're looking at needs that still exist, the question is, where does microtransit fit now in this ecosystem, and how do we deal with low density areas and people who are sprawling? And I'm excited to have a group of panelists here who have real expertise on this. And what we're going to do is I'm going to ask them a series of questions as we sort of go through this. You can pop up with a question. In the meantime, we are going to leave 5 minutes at the end just to make sure that we take questions. And we have a very hard stop at 9:40 because there's another session booked in this room. So the Queen of Improv from RTAP, which is the Rural Transit Assistance Program, tell us why we even care about microtransit in these areas. What are the unmet needs right now?
Well, I know that the
that what people need is always customer service, respect, and access. And that microtransit is really sexy because what it says is, tell us what you want and we'll give it to you. And most rural transits are trying to do that already. And so I would say that from the rural transit perspective, you have systems that are, I know of them, in the middle of nowhere, 150 miles to a town of 50,000 or 80,000, working to provide 15-minute headways on a demand response system. And they can't guarantee that, but that's what their goal is, and that's what they try to do. And why? Because they want people to be able to access what's going on in their community. And I think microtransit, from the perspective of Kelley, who is coming from the area where now I live in Northern Virginia, is looking at the technology and the people, and everyone's looking at how great it is to be able to be in downtown Alexandria or downtown DC and be able to, hey, Uber, 2 minutes, you've got a ride. I spent the year, I went to West Virginia and was unable to get any kind of Uber or Lyft, and ended up hitching a ride with another participant because it just isn't that kind of service out there. You don't have the number of drivers driving. But I also know that some of the drug treatment programs in rural areas are using Uber and Lyft as a way to bring people into the system and make sure that people have access. So microtransit, from my perspective, is enhancing the ability of operators to do more of what they're doing and using technology to become more efficient and make that happen.
Yep, sounds great. So, Alex, I've been working with you at the routing company for a while. When we started, we had the same issue. Like, how are we going to do this in an area that's not dense? I wondered if you might talk about some of the experiences that you've had of working where there's not density, and why microtransit can address that issue now.
Yeah. So first, thanks for being able to talk to everybody here. So when we started the company, we were really focused on high density areas. We came from more of a rideshare background, really looking at high volume. And when we were not sure about the efficacy of our approach and applied to rural areas until we had a few deployments, as well as when we saw the need for such systems. So we actually have a few deployments in Scotland that are extremely low density over a massive service area, serviced by one vehicle. We are essentially the principal provider of transportation in this community. They rely on it to get to the hospital. They used our bus systems to get vaccinated during the pandemic, and now we're just in general the connector for the community. And all of this is being done totally on demand most of the time, with 13% of our trips coming from call center based booking. So even this very low density area, people are still booking with apps. And just to get an idea of how well this is working in rural Scotland, we're able to get 3 to 4 passengers per vehicle revenue hour in an extremely low density area, getting about 200 trips per week with one vehicle. So yeah, I see the role as essentially removing some very underperforming fixed bus lines that weren't really able to meet the needs of the people in this area of Scotland. And we saw an amazing uptick and also induced demand from offering this shared on-demand service, which is really amazing to see, our system perform well without many differences in a low-density area as well as in a very high-density area.
Chloe is with Cityway, which she happens to be based here in North America, but Cityway works globally on these issues. Can you talk to us about what your experience has been in working with transit providers on using microtransit to serve rural or small communities?
Yeah, so we have about 150 different projects, and we come from the dial-a-ride services since 2003. We have been working on a lot of different projects. In France, the law required in 2003 to smaller towns and counties to take care of rural areas on demand. So we had to that's when we created our software for call center to take reservation and start working on the on-demand. So our solution grew from that. When we work on a rural area, we usually, like everybody's saying, is just looking at the activity people are trying to do, like going to work, going to healthcare, going to school, doing the groceries. So on the project, you see people that book way in advance also, because that's something they want to make sure they're going to have a seat on the vehicle because they need it. So that's something that a lot of people are talking, we need real time, we need the vehicle right now. We need to group people to be able to serve them properly. So yeah, we have a lot of projects in Canada, we have projects in Louisiana right now, and then what we see is that, yes, the people are very, they need to have a service that meets the way they live today, and so the on-demand is something that is very important today. Same thing you are saying, we saw the mobility on-demand sandbox, and then we saw all the tech companies coming in, and then we see the transit agencies now that are taking over this topic. So it's very important to have the public service in mind always for this type of projects.
So part of the question about the ecosystem is not just the kind of service, but who's looking to provide that kind of service. And so I wanted just to poll our audience for a second, just as a show of hands. How many of you work with people who are responsible for providing transportation services in rural or small communities? There you go. How many of you are using microtransit now to help meet those needs in those communities? Okay, good mix. Are those, I guess sort of quickly, sort of like, who are those providers? Are they university campuses? Anybody at university campuses? How about employers like healthcare centers or correction facilities or factories? Nope. How about through aging agencies or nonprofits in the human services area or drug treatment centers? Okay, well that gives us a good picture. So I wanted to ask you all who you think need to be the sort of people who are engaged on microtransit, because I think a lot of times in the transit field we tend to be really big urban focus. And as someone who got her start in transit working in Texas before there was light rail in Houston and Dallas, I learned that there were huge transportation needs in rural areas. So you want to start? Who are the people who need to be planning for microtransit?
Well, I would define microtransit as basically the people who are part of the ecosystem that transits are working with. A lot of it has to be the state DOTs understanding that you can do same-day service and helping bring a barrier is actually understanding what you can do with the money and the resources you have. And at the table, usually those people, you're asking them to be at the table, but sometimes you have to reach out, and I think you need to bring the court system, you need to bring the DD community, you need to bring the people who are trying to use the system or need to use the system. They're gatekeepers. They need to be at the table with you and helping do those coordinated plans so that you can get everything on the table, resources and needs.
Alex, who are you working with in your projects? Are you working with national governments, state level governments?
Yeah, so in our rural deployment, we work with local governments in Scotland, but our biggest relationship is with a local bus operator over there that's really a pillar of the community. They've been providing, fixed bus routes, for this area in Scotland and the West Coast for many years, and we provided them the technology for them to launch their microtransit systems, these on-demand modes of transportation. And what we saw is like generally there's just a need from this operator who's just such a part of the community to offer transportation and to be able to do it profitably. Yeah.
So, are you working with any transit agencies?
So we were working with HyTrans, the Highlands and Islands Transportation Authority in Scotland, and through that we got connected to West Coast Motors, which is the private operator that we use or that we partner with in the west coast of Scotland in a few deployments.
Chloe. So Chloe is part of Transdev, which is one of the world's largest global mobility service providers, and has worked in this field for 2 decades. You've been working here in North America for a while. Can you talk a little bit about the transit agencies or community transit people that you work with, and what do they get beyond this component of customer preference, or what do they need in terms of making their systems more responsive?
Okay, so first question, we do work with a lot of transit agencies, local government. We work also with employers, so we had the project with the Department of Transportation for Detroit, and we worked with all the employers from the I-95 corridor, so trying to organize the Detroit to work projects. Work with healthcare and economic deployment in very rural areas, so they usually are the one that launch the system, and then you have an organization that plan the system. What they need the information, they need to see all these type of projects are going to be implemented. So what people are you going to move? What services do we need to implement? What are the assets you're going to have available? In some areas you don't have taxis, you don't have fixed route, you just have few vehicles, or you're going to be able to finance one vehicle, and then what do you do? We work a lot in Canada with mixed fleet. So we have areas that are group, they call MRC. They have a group of municipalities that work together to finance 1 or 2 vehicles. On top of this, they work with some taxis, and then they work with volunteer drivers. So that's something that we see also in counties here in the US. So they ask us to say, okay, this is what we have. So when we don't have enough drivers, then we're going to go see the volunteers. So all the tech can work with that. So optimization of the assets and being able to dispatch on the different vehicle with specific rules. They need to have information. They need flexible system that they're going to be able to tweak all the time to see, okay, you read the data and you see that it's working, that it's meeting the need of the people you're moving around, but also the economic efficiency of your program. Because if you only have one person in the vehicle all the time, it's not viable. You're just not going to be able to make it. So being able to have this flexibility in the solution you implement, work with the field to be able to really have the assets that are optimized on the long run.
So, a minute. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say something about the mobility ecosystem in rural areas. And a lot of times we think that, oh, they're all isolated, they can't get anywhere, we have to call a bus. Between 20 and 30% in rural and highly rural areas are using non-SOV travel for getting to work. That means that you've got transit, biking, walking happening a lot. And so one of the things with the transit that you put in is creating permeability between those modes. Do you have bike racks on all your buses? Is there the ability to put a bike on whatever vehicle you're using? Are you using that? And that helps invite a whole swath of people. And I think that interoperability between modes, that intermodality, is extremely important in rural areas, because you aren't going to be able to do that last mile or last 2 miles necessarily with that vehicle and still be able to stay afloat. And I think thinking about the rural mobility environment in terms of having that really rich need for interoperability is important.
So, Chloe and Alex, I like to think of transit in its many different varieties, whether it's with a human service agency or community transit, or it's part of a local system, as the spine of our shared mobility. So the question I have is, where does microtransit fit in? And not so much in terms of the service, but in terms of what you learn about what you're doing. And if you could speak to where something has changed, where someone's has used microtransit.
Yeah, so I can share about a bit what we learned, as well as the operator in Scotland that we were working with. So what we learned was the importance of pre-booking and certainty about getting somewhere, especially when you're in a rural area. You know, being able to go to the hospital and make sure that you get there on time when, you know, you're actually being used as such a like pretty critical, you know, connector for the community. You just can't be unfulfilling people. You can't be dropping requests. And so we've tailored the system a bit to work more effectively with a single vehicle by adjusting our, you know, a bit of our parameters, but also allowing, I guess, informing the ridership as well as the operator about, you know, what are the expectations of the system? How is it going to work? What are you going to get with an on-demand booking versus a pre-booking, and sharing those expectations as well as like expected, you know, expected wait times and delays and whatnot. Sort of, I guess it's, you know, establishes some type of like service level agreement with the ridership that then they're able to work around and become integrated with a bit more. It's almost like a new capability for moving around, and if the ridership doesn't really know how it works or what the expectations are, then, you know, it's not going to be as effective for them.
We learn a lot when we look at the data. We work with EXO in Montreal. We are with a municipality that brings people back to the REM. They have a train station in the area, so the people are just getting on the microtransit service to do the connection, so they are getting back on track after COVID. And then so they are asking better, like more connection with the train for the commute. They use the bike racks on the microtransit services, so we provide the information. There's a rack available. There's already, is it going to be available for your ride, or is it taken already? So all the type of information that give them like really the confidence to use the on-demand service. In terms of what we are doing a lot right now and the integration with other system, so we come from the advanced trip planning, so we are able to connect car plus parking plus transit. And today what we see, these microtransit project from the rider standpoint, it's not easy to understand the offer. It's like sometimes it's not working, it's working at a specific time during the day. It's a geofenced area, so you have to be careful where you book. So there's a lot of refusal rate, or there's not a good visibility on how it works. So what we do now for smaller transit agencies or clients, smaller in a low density area, it's combining all the different mobility offers within the app. Like being able to provide connection at drop-off, saying, well, okay, this is, you have like a suburban fixed route that comes in. So here are the next bus passing time in like schedule or real time. We provide information on bike racks outside, so you can park your own bike and then you can ride in the microtransit service. So a lot of information to really work on the intermodality, the really connecting people with not only the on-demand service, but how to get there and how to connect with other modes.
So 4 things. One is working on communicating how it works
Yes.
in the first place. Secondly, how it connects with the rest of the system and having the integration into the app. The third would be the data that that you gather that could influence the way that you're operating your regular systems as well. And fourth is the understanding the needs of the transit providers and being able to respond to them on a pretty fine-tuned basis. We are at time for some questions.